And I think it's also important to take note of the small validations and successes, because one day you'll look back and you'll see what you have done and what you've accomplished.
This episode features the story of Cindy Messaros, Director of Alberta, Canada Workforce Essential Skills Society. Cindy didn't set out to become a leader, but her story shows us that you don't have to be a Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk in order to be an expert and an authority figure. And when imposter syndrome and self-doubt hit, you can still tackle it head on.
Hi folks, I'm your host Edith Richards, and you may know me from my podcast series, Myers-Briggs Question Corner, or my website at topcareer.com. I've spent the last 20 years of my career helping people get smart about their careers. And I've found that lots of smart people aren't successful. Why is that? I'm convinced it's due to emotional intelligence. In EQ at Work, I'm bringing you inspiring people and messages to help you get smart about your emotions. Some people don't set out to lead, but they nonetheless find themselves in leadership positions. They may have been encouraged to take on the opportunity, or they may have just stumbled into the role. There's a term called accidental leadership or unintentional leadership, and there's a book titled The Accidental Leader: What to Do When You're Suddenly in Charge by Harvey Robbins. In a world where everyone wants to lead, I find the story of my guest today refreshing and inspiring because leadership was never her aspiration. I am so pleased to have Cindy Messaros with us today, who's the Executive Director of Alberta Workforce Essential Skills Society. Cindy has been working in the field of employment initiatives for 30 years as a teacher, a facilitator, researcher, curriculum developer, and advocate for groups who face barriers. Since 2008, as the Executive Director of Alberta Workforce Essential Skills Society, which is otherwise known as AWS, she has been a strong advocate for essential skills development, helping to create change at an organizational level. And she has spoken about essential skills at conferences across Canada and the US, working with client organizations to provide them a product that best meets their needs, especially for newly arrived immigrants. She's passionate about the positive effect of the work Oz has on people's lives and the businesses they work for. So this is such a mouthful to say, but I am so pleased that Cindy is with us today. Cindy, welcome to EQ at Work.
Thank you, Edith. I'm so happy to be here too.
We are really happy to have you. I would love for you to start us out here by telling us a bit about your career journey.
Sure. I started as a research assistant with the Alberta government in a branch called Access Initiatives. And my role was to figure out ways of reducing the barriers to apprenticeship and trades employment that women, people with disabilities, youth, Indigenous, and immigrants faced. I did a couple of pilot projects working with youth and mentors in the apprenticeship system. And I wrote a train the trainer manual for journeymen to connect better with youth regarding the trades. They often would get called in to do career talks at schools, and they didn't really know how to connect with the students very well. So that was one of my jobs. Of those groups, I had a particular interest in immigrants and the barriers that they faced. So I went back to university to get a postgraduate diploma in teaching English as a second language. I taught ESL for 20 years in Canada and abroad before I stumbled on a framework called Workplace Essential Skills.
So Workplace Essential Skills. So it sounds like that's something very similar to what we do in the US with workforce development.
This is a theoretical framework, and it's based on the International Adult Literacy Surveys.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. So there are 9 skills and there are 5 complexity levels, and like it's a whole theoretical framework.
So that kind of piqued your interest, especially when you're talking about immigrants who are at all of these different skill levels, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I thought that in addition to language, that this was really a missing piece of the puzzle related to their employment barriers. Because getting a good job, like getting a job and retaining it and getting promoted, it takes a different kind of knowledge than what pure language teaching will bring. So I became credentialed as an essential skills profiler, which meant that I could go to a workplace and analyze tasks and complexity levels to see where and what kind of training might be needed. This particular training didn't help me for a couple of years. So things were pretty rough during that time. But one day, kind of out of the blue, I had a call to join a think tank. And shortly after that, I was invited to manage a project working with immigrants for this organization that I'm now with. I had a full-time job at that moment, but I really wanted to manage the project. So essentially, I had to work 2 full-time jobs for a period of time. So working 2 full-time jobs is not maybe the best professional decision to make. Anyway, I ended up not having my contract renewed at the college that I was working at. In essence, I was fired. And it was devastating. And I was ashamed and I felt frightened for my future.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry to hear that. Getting let go from a job like that, especially under those circumstances, I mean, I can't imagine how awful that must have been for you.
It was really scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being let go from a job is one of the most difficult experiences anyone will face. And when you're a single mother trying to get by and make a good life for your kids, it's just that much scarier. We know that losing a job and searching for a new one takes a toll on both our physical and mental health and can create higher levels of anxiety, frustration, and depression. This makes sense because with job loss, you've lost your routine and the security of having a regular paycheck. The COVID pandemic has made these struggles even worse, and women have been hit especially hard. Women have lost more jobs as the result of the pandemic, and according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more women are quitting their jobs in order to take care of their school-aged children. But quitting isn't an option for most single moms. The fact is that the future is very uncertain and it's very scary. If you're tuning in and you find yourself in this situation, in addition to reaching out to your local jurisdiction for assistance, be sure to check community organizations in your area, including religious organizations, as many offer resources or will point you in the direction of additional services. Online support groups can be a huge help too. And when you're ready to begin your job search, be sure to have an active, up-to-date LinkedIn profile, as well as a targeted resume. But before any of that, you have to bounce back from the blow of losing your job. And this is where we pick up the conversation with Cindy.
How did you bounce back from that?
Well, I had this job as project manager, and at that time, it was only 4 days a month. And the woman that had hired me had passed away. And so I ended up having, just kind of being responsible for the entire society. So I had to learn a lot. I was a single mom with 2 small kids at home, and I guess I just had no way to go but forward. So with the society, I ended up with the responsibility of finishing the project and writing reports and reporting to the board. And I have to admit, I didn't even know what a board was at that time.
Oh, wow.
Or what their role was. I had to make sure that contractors and consultants had been paid off. And basically all of the boxes from the organization were brought to my house. And I had no frame of reference for what I was supposed to do. So I just started sifting through them.
So you were kind of thrust into this role or on this project, and you didn't really have any support. And, I can't even imagine that. Not only did you not know where to turn, you probably at that point didn't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah, I look back and wonder why I even tried to keep it going. I didn't know anything about nonprofits or boards or writing proposals or budgets or seeking funding or writing contracts and hiring people. I didn't know anything about that.
But you did have a passion for the work that they do. And it was almost like that was your guiding light. Like that was what sparked you into this role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had like a demographic that I wanted to figure out how to help them.
It sounds like you're figuring it out.
Yeah, I think so. When I think back to where I was one person doing all the work. And now we've got, I don't know, maybe 15 people working at this organization. I think that it was in many ways easier to build the organization than it would have been to step into something large that was already functioning. So I think in some ways, being able to build was probably easier. I think, if I had applied for that job, the hiring committee probably would have laughed at my resume. But I started with one project and a great colleague. And that's really important to state that I had a colleague that I worked with who I trusted, and we worked really well together. And we just, kind of grew ourselves and grew the organization.
It just goes to show how important it is to have that trust and that good working relationship with our colleagues. And I also think that's something a lot of people don't, sometimes just in the corporate hustle bustle, we tend to miss that. So it just sounds like that was your saving grace.
Yeah, it was. And I had a supportive board member. There were 3 board members and 2 of them resigned right when I was starting. So I worked with this one board member and we slowly built up the board as well. Yeah, so I had a lot of support from that person too.
Well, that's great to hear. I am so interested in your story, Cindy, particularly because you didn't seek out a leadership role and you were, kind of thrust into this position. And in growing this organization, it's such a huge success. I wonder what it is about your character that has allowed you to succeed in this role.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my process was just sheer hard work and determination. There were probably 2 years that I worked every evening and almost every weekend. And I also felt a sense of responsibility to the society and the people that they were working with at that time. And somehow all of the pieces just landed in my lap, literally. And I felt I had to make it work. So I guess I'd have to say persistence. For the first 5 years, we were never sure we would be operating the next year. In 2013, we got a huge project to test a new theory in the employment world. And one thing after another beyond my control kind of threatened its success. But I just wasn't willing to give up. I kept looking for solutions and trying out new things and finding different supports. And in the end, we succeeded in that project. And I think maybe also needing a challenge. I had a really great job that I was good at, and it didn't really require too much extra effort. I was off work early every day, and I had enough time to exercise and have a social life. But something felt like it was missing. And I remember that feeling and I'm wondering, like, why couldn't I be happy with that? So I think being genuine and curious and not afraid to ask for help goes a long way too.
I think that's really interesting there, what you said too about, there was something missing. There was sort of a challenge that's missing there and you couldn't quite put your finger on it. And then all of a sudden you got a whole lot of challenges there kind of thrown at you. But the great thing was, I don't think it was anything more than you could handle because it sounds like you've done great with it. And, society tells us that career success means climbing the corporate ladder. And leadership is this way to reward people for all of their hard effort. However, it often comes without any direction. And that certainly sounds like the case with you. It's just assumed that when we get to a certain point in our careers, this is what you get. And one of the biggest ironies, again, that I've heard you mention is how you didn't seek out this role. And it sounds like to me, you don't necessarily think of yourself as a leader. Or maybe there's even that hesitation there about being a leader. How do you come to terms with that?
Yeah, all of that is so true. And it's interesting in this job, we get called lots of times by companies who have promoted an employee to a leadership position, primarily because the employee was a good employee. But once in the leadership position, they find that the employee doesn't have the skills or support to be a good leader. And I can really empathize with that. That's basically what happened to me.
Yeah.
But for my role right now, I'm surrounded by a great team of talented people, a supportive board, and colleagues across the country who I've learned a lot from. I believe they've contributed to my leadership skills. And through time, this space of leadership has become softer for me. It's like with gaining and refining any skill or competency, you have to do the work, and that can be painful. And it still sometimes is. But for the most part, I feel like I've come through the other side.
At this point in the conversation, we began talking about how Cindy was able to come through to the other side, as she mentioned. This was where the conversation turned to imposter syndrome. According to the American Psychological Association, imposter syndrome is a phenomenon that often occurs among high achievers who, for whatever reason, cannot internalize and accept their success. Instead, they attribute their success to luck rather than ability. They may also fear that others will find out that they're actually a fraud. Imposter syndrome seems to be more common among people who are embarking on a new career path or are in a new role where they're expected to function at a capacity that they don't believe they're ready to handle. And it's estimated that up to 70% of us will experience it. It goes hand in hand with perfectionism, either spending more time than necessary on work or procrastinating, believing they won't be able to meet the high standards. In our society today, there's huge pressure to achieve. And the real problem with imposter syndrome is that even if you do well at something, you still have this anxious feeling inside that you're just not good enough. We don't want our self-worth to be contingent upon our outward achievements. Yet there are so many messages in the media, in our education systems, in consumer culture, and in social media in general that fuel imposter syndrome. And it's so hard not to internalize those messages. We must look a certain way to be successful. That's a big one. And these messages can trigger us to unknowingly compare ourselves to others. Why can't I do that? The reality is that the seemingly flawless life this other person is living isn't their reality. It's just what they want you to see. Though this may sound counterintuitive, one of the best ways to cope, especially if you're in a helping profession like Cindy is to help others. If you see someone who's new to the group or who seems like they're awkward or alone, ask that person questions and try to get to know them. In providing help and reassurance to them, you'll provide reassurance and validation to yourself and will boost your confidence, making you feel less alone.
What advice would you give to others who are in similar positions or who have a similar journey?
Well, I guess I would say do not let fear stop you from going through with something, and be curious, be prepared, and work hard. And I think it's also important to take note of the small validations and successes, because one day you'll look back and you'll see what you have done and what you've accomplished.
Yeah, well said. I mean, there's so few of us who actually take the time to acknowledge and celebrate our successes, rather than just checking them off a box. And it's so important to be able to do that and to really internalize everything that you've accomplished.
I agree, Edith.
So, Cindy, I really appreciate you sharing this story with us. And the one thought that I'm left with after talking to you is just how just this passion that you have ignited into just a larger reach that you have with more people. And I know it wasn't what you thought that you'd be doing probably at this point in your life, but you and everyone who does this type of work are so needed in our world today. So thank you so much for all you do. If anybody's listening out there who wants to get in touch with you, how would you like them to get in touch?
I have a profile on LinkedIn, so that would be the perfect place.
Okay, that sounds great. And I will include a link to your profile in the listening notes then. Cindy Messaros, thank you again for joining us for EQ at Work. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Edith.
Anyone who has taken an introductory psychology course knows about Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. These needs are described as survival, security, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. The premise is that as humans climb a ladder of needs, reaching for the next highest rung as the previous, the need has been met. In emotional intelligence, the element of self-actualization is that pursuit of meaning, striving to achieve personal goals and self-improvement. This skill tends to be associated with feelings of self-satisfaction, and people who are highly skilled in self-actualization search for a deeper, richer meaning in their lives. They enjoy the process of learning, they set meaningful goals and work to achieve them. It is a skill often associated with exceptional leadership. Cindy mentioned 3 things that speak to both her leadership tendencies and her skill in self-actualization. First, be yourself and be authentic. Don't try to be someone else. Cindy didn't worry too much about leadership styles, communication tricks, or other tactics. The most effective way for her to lead is just to be herself, unapologetically. Second, Cindy did a lot of uncomfortable things that got her out of her comfort zone. By virtue of our own human nature, we do things that we like and enjoy. However, when we start doing uncomfortable things, we grow, as Cindy did. Third, Cindy mentioned that one of the biggest reasons for her success is due to the fact that she works with great people. So surround yourself with people who inspire you. Who you work with is equally, if perhaps not more important, than what you work on and where you work. If your colleagues don't inspire you, you're not in a growth environment. To become more self-actualized, ask yourself questions like these. What are some of the things that you truly enjoy doing? How do you currently make time to do these things? What areas in your leadership would you like to further develop? And why is it important for you to develop these areas? How can you incorporate these things that you enjoy into your leadership development, considering your current lifestyle today?
Thanks for listening to EQ at Work. Find us using the hashtag EQ at Work, or visit our website eqatwork.net. Subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Spreaker, or your favorite podcast platform. We'd love you to leave a rating or review, and if you have a moment, a simple share would be wonderful. Remember, tell your friends, mastering your emotions matters. Next week's episode is on the trauma and recovery of sexual abuse. We do hope you'll tune in, but due to the sensitive nature of the topic, listener discretion is advised.